Monday, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. I'm gonna come before y'all with a different message this time, and I can only pray that I'm able to deliver this message in the way that it's been coming to me for a while now, and in the way that God would have me do it. About a month or two ago, maybe it was, I did a message talking about the messenger and how a lot of times we can end up missing the message that we're supposed to receive, all because we are focusing on the messenger that's delivering it instead of the actual message itself. And one of the main points of it, for where I'm concerned, would be any type of relationship advice, or anything that even pertains to marriages as well. Of course, as most of you all know, I am single. I'm not in a relationship. I've never been married before, even though I do have a desire to be in a marriage one day, and I know that that will happen when the time comes. It's funny because I always find myself helping others with their relationships and marriages, and I can never figure out why. For the longest time, I thought it was maybe a coincidence. That I was finding myself surrounded a lot of times by people in troubled marriages or relationships, or that, people were coming to me about those situations. And I was never sure why it would a lot of times happen. I think more and more I do start to see it as a little bit of a blessing, maybe in a sense that I can oftentimes help people with situations I've never been in. Some might even say, the gift of empathy, whatever you want to use to describe it. I do know for a reason that I'm crossing paths with certain people, of certain relationship statuses for a reason. But anyway, one of the main things that I always ask people when they're having any type of trouble or issue is, aside from the actual issue itself, and then I ask them, remember why you first fell in love to begin with. And how was it in the beginning? What was it like in the beginning that you wanted to be with that person, that caused you to propose to that person, to say yes when they asked you, about being official, getting married, whatever? What made you actually meet them at the altar, say those vows, whatever the case might be? What was it like in the beginning? Because a lot of times we have to learn to get back to that place. This message has a couple of different points, and I promise you it's going to all tie together throughout it and in the end. Of course, I've been on my own spiritual journey with God and with Christianity, and it's something I talk about a lot. Again, obviously, a lot of my posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever the case might be, a lot of times they are about religion, or they are about Christianity, they are about God, they are about Jesus, and it's pretty much that way because I've fallen in love with God. I remember many years ago, one of my sister's friends, Renisha, sorry for calling you out, but a lot of times she would send these random messages to me, whether it was a text message, an email, or whether it was actually through my sister. And it would be things that God had told her that he wanted her to relay to me. And I remember one time, one of the things that he had said to her to tell me was, let me be your husband first. That he wanted to be my husband first. And I couldn't figure out the reason or the meaning behind telling me that. And again, I've always, believed in God, believed in Jesus. So I was, Christian in that aspect of the word. I was not an active Christ follower, if you will. So when she said that, I was just like, oh, okay, whatever. But of course, unbeknownst to me at that point, the seed was just being planted. It didn't actually sprout, or nothing actually became of that seed until many, many years later. So what was interesting to me is I do a lot of my Bible reading. And I remember something a couple of months ago when I was in the book of Genesis and the story of Jacob. And of course, and for those of you who might not know the full story behind it, it was a situation where Rebecca, when they had twins, Jacob and Esau was supposed to get the birthright. Rebecca helped Jacob trick the father into blessing him with the birthright. So he stole the birthright from Esau. And of course, Esau was very angry. The father was angry. And Jacob, he ran. He ran all the way, to a different area. And Rebecca had a brother, Laban, who lived in a different area, and told him to go there. And that's what Jacob did. Jacob ran from from what he had done, from the mistake or whatever that he had done. And what's funny with me, that I'm now flipping back to my own personal story, is I remember back in 2010 when God was calling me to do something, but I ran from what he was wanting me to do. And if I can get personal for a little bit, he was actually calling me into taking a vow of celibacy and abstaining from sex. And at that point, I was in a relationship. And of course, I'm sorry, but we were sexually active in that relationship. Obviously, I have 2 kids. So I was like, okay, I can't go from having sex to now not having sex. What is that going to do for my relationship? How is this whole thing going to work out? But I would feel guilty a lot of times, and I did what some of us females do when I said I had a headache, or I would pretend like I was sleeping because I did not want to do it. And sometimes, of course, I would still engage in it or whatever the case might be, but I would always feel guilty about it because I knew what God was calling me to do. So again, like Jacob, I ran from what I heard God clearly telling me to do. And one thing we also know in the story of Jacob is that he had agreed to work for Laban for 7 years for free because Jacob had laid eyes on one of Laban's daughters, which was Rachel. And the Bible talks about, Rachel and Leah, the 2 sisters, and how Rachel was the prettier one. They described Leah as having weak eyes, I think it was. And I think that was then the terminology that was used for someone who just wasn't that nice looking, who was maybe facially challenged, if you will. So he wanted Rachel, and he agreed to work for Rachel for 7 years. At the end of the 7 years, he was supposed to get her. So finally, at the end of the 7 years, he said, okay, I've worked for you, and it's time for me to take Rachel as my wife. Laban said, okay, gave Jacob what Jacob thought was Rachel, took her that night, and laid down with her and consummated the marriage. And of course, when he woke up the next morning, he realized that he had been tricked, and it was not Rachel that he was waking up to. It was actually Leah. And of course, he was angry because he'd worked for 7 years, and that's not what was supposed to happen. So it's crazy to me a lot of times when we run and when we do things that we're not supposed to do and we go against what we're called to do, a lot of times we can end up waking up next to Leah's. And that's been my story, while I was in that past relationship and while I've been dating off and on, here over the past couple of years, that I would find myself sometimes waking up next to Leah's. Not literally, obviously, but again, and all because I ran and I was not doing what I was supposed to do. So that was something it was very hard for me to deal with when I finally realized that. But one thing we have to keep in mind about the story of Jacob is that it's a great reminder that God is faithful to those. God is faithful to those, and he keeps his promises even when people fail. Even when we don't do what we're supposed to do, he is a God who is just to thankfully forgive us more than anything. But we know that he's also a God, and Romans 8:28 tells us that all things work together for the good of those who love him. And he can take even our mistakes, the ugly truths about ourselves, the things that we shouldn't have done, that shame, the guilt, the wrong turns, whatever it is, and he can still get the glory of it all. He can still get the glory out of all of it. And if you want to go deeper into a little bit with the whole Jacob situation, Jacob and Leah, Jesus Christ is in the direct lineage of that family and of, the children that they had and the many different children. If you actually look at the genealogy tree or the family tree, you will actually see that out of that whole situation that was a mistake, that Jacob was not supposed to be with Leah, it happened exactly how it was supposed to happen. Or should I say that, that God still had a plan even there in what Jacob thought was a mistake. So I'm thankful for that, and I keep that in mind because now I don't have to be so hard on myself about running like Jacob, running for 7 years. Because like I said, it was 2010 when I was first being called into the whole celibacy thing. So I'm glad that I finally did, make the right decision as far as that's concerned. The top of this year, 7 years later in 2017, I did finally make the decision to become celibate. And of course, as many people know, I did end up buying myself a ring. I'm not sure if you can see it, but I bought myself a ring. And I know some people would wonder why the ring and what was the point of that. For me, it was to solidify that. It was to declare that. It was to show that I was serious about it. And it was me taking that vow and saying, God, I'm doing things the right way, and I'm waiting on you. And I'm not taking this ring off until you send someone, my way, who is willing to replace this with a different ring. And I'm declaring it, and I have no issue in doing with that. So thank you, Renisha, for what you had relayed to me many years ago. And again, sometimes it takes that seed being planted, and I get it now, and I'm in love. And while I'm in love with God, I'm in love with Jesus, and I'm letting him be my husband first, as he said. It's up to me to keep the fire. I wasn't always like this, okay? While I always believed, I was never on fire for Christ like I am now. Sacrificing sleep? Absolutely not. I never, ever would have done that before. But now I look forward to those 5:30, that 5:30 time in the morning where it's just me, Jesus, and coffee. It's still dark out. The house is very quiet, and I have that time where it's just me and him. And I look forward to that. But at the same time, just like I have to remember with those people that I asked them, remember what it was like in the beginning. All relationships have those different stages. There are times when things are going to be great. There are times when things aren't that great. And I say that for the longest time, me and Jesus, we were in the honeymoon stage. It was wonderful. It was awesome. I was excited about meeting him there. And then it got to the point where sometimes I had to drag myself out of bed. I didn't feel like doing it that morning. I was sleepy. I would say, Jesus, I'm not getting out of this bed, but how about you come inside this bed, and I'll pray to you here and talk to you here and screw the coffee. But, I'll read my devotionals and kind of skim through them or rush through them, and then I'm going to hurry up and go back to sleep. So it's like that honeymoon stage. It was getting to that point where it was over, and we would sometimes argue. Well, we didn't argue. I argued, and I lost. And that's just how that worked. I would argue with Jesus, and I would never get my way. And that's fine, because that's what it's all about. That's what relationships are all about. It's all about sacrifice and compromising. And it's about being with someone who's going to bring out the best in you. And I think a lot of times people don't realize what marriage is all about. And once you take those vows before God, you're understanding that God owns the copyright to marriage, and the real purpose of a marriage, or should I say, marriage was the first human institution that he established. So I always say that God owns the copyright to marriage, and he created it for, to have man and woman joining together to serve and glorify him. If your desire to get married is just because you want to be married and just to have somebody, then you now have marriage itself as an idol, because that's not what it's all about. But I always say, again, just keep in mind those different stages that come along with relationships. And I remember a few months ago when I was feeling just like off and something was a little bit disconnected. I still felt the presence of God. I was still doing my devotional, still going to church, still doing everything else, but something was weird. And it wasn't until I actually read another devotional and the Holy Spirit had to reveal to me at that very moment, when I had just cried about it the night before, was that, okay, you're in a different season. That's all. He will meet you where you are, but it doesn't mean he's going to let you stay there. And for me, it was realizing, okay, it's because I want to connect with you in a different way. And that's what it was all about. So it's like we're now in a different stage in this relationship. So your marriage, you might be in a different, stage. Your engagement, your this time of you being single, whatever it is, just enjoy that time, because there are different stages. And sometimes you might find yourself in the wilderness, but it's all about what you're actually going to do while you're in the wilderness. Who do you have to depend on? And are you making sure that you're going to him first and trusting that he's going to get you out of there? So again, with me, it was, I had to, even like Jacob was instructed, sometimes we have to go back to Bethel, where we actually made those vows and where we first felt his presence, and get back to that point, to that initial happiness. And it took me 7 years. I'm glad I'm in the place that I'm at now. And like I said, this message, it did have two different things, I guess, that we're kind of looking at. But for me, it's all been tying together. And it's an awesome feeling. It's a great experience. It's a great journey. As I always say, it's the greatest of all romance. And I even heard that in a worship song before. It's a relationship with God is truly the greatest of all romance. But it's just like any other relationship. It's going to take work. It takes time. It takes determination. It takes dedication. And it's up to you to keep the fire and to go back to that, whatever else. And it takes sacrifices. And for me, it was sacrificing sex and sleep and many different things. But I'm trusting that God has something better, and it's all going to pay off in the end. So again, with the many different points, I hope you were able to take something from this. I pray that that it reaches somebody, and maybe it speaks to somebody, and that it was received in the way that God had me deliver it to you all. So love you all. Praying for you all, and hope all is well, and hope you all enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Be blessed.